Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Roundup. I got to record this a little bit earlier than usual, so there could be some posts that came in after this was recorded, but if that's the case, I'll just get to them in next week's Roundup. But anyway, let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Marco Retro just released a video titled The A to Z of RGB Modding a CRT, and Marco did this along with a buddy of mine, DJ Cali, who is also somebody very experienced in modding CRTs for RGB inputs. And I gotta say, first off, the first time I ever saw a CRT, a consumer grade CRT that was RGB modded, I was really blown away. It looked exactly like an arcade monitor, and depending on the model, it might look exactly like a professional video monitor as well. Now, you're never going to get the exact geometry or higher line counts that you would of some of the very high-end BVM or even PVMs. It's still a really great choice, especially if you find something like I actually still stumble across quite a bit. Like you have somebody who had a spare TV in a spare bedroom that was never used. It just got a couple hours of use on it, but maybe it only has an RF input or only composite inputs. Then you could essentially get yourself a brand new, quote unquote RGB monitor for free and just doing some work to it. So as with any mods to your CRT, you always have to understand that if it's not discharged properly before you work on it, and of course, if you don't plug the anode cup back in properly before plugging it into the wall when you're done, it could kill you. Now, there's a whole bunch of people out there that says it can't, but trust me, there's definitely a danger here that does not exist when you're doing something like RGB modding a Super Nintendo. Unless you do it in a bathtub or something incredibly stupid, then there is really no death risk for something like that, where the risk is not zero for modding a CRT. Obviously, there's all the disclaimers here that you could imagine as well, but if you were interested in getting started with this, or even if you just kind of wanted to see what it was like, even if you really didn't have a desire to do it yourself, great video, great post as well. Read through for a written description with everything that you might need to reference, you familiarize yourself with before digging into it. But work like this, and of course, Steve from RetroTech, is really important to not only the preservation of these CRTs, but really getting the best out of it. Because that whole you found a mint condition RF only CRT scenario is still really common, and you could absolutely stumble across a nice one that just needs, a little bit of love and care to make it an incredible gaming monitor. So give the video and post a check, or check out both the video and post, and, everybody who works on this stuff, keep them coming, because it really just gives people a sense of what could be done with these. The Sega Dreamcast-based internet drama called Birdcage of Horrors just got an English translation. So now you're able to experience this in English, including all of the menus, the VMU icons, and everything else. And this was the same thing that I talked about a few weeks ago, that developer Derek Pascarillo was able to make work on modern Dreamcasts without being connected to the servers, which went down 20 years ago, without needing special crazy save files. And I talked about it then, and also Derek's post for this English translation has all of the info that you need on it. But essentially, this allows us to experience this Dreamcast-based horror film the way you could have if you had watched it back in the day. Now, you could also just watch them one right after the other, where I believe back in the day you had to download a little snippet every single day for a total of 407 FMVs. But this is just really cool. This is just a snapshot of some pretty unique history that you're able to experience if you want to, and you could do it all in original hardware and now in English. So while I don't want to repeat everything I said a few weeks ago, I would strongly recommend anybody who's even remotely interested to at least check out Derek's post here and go through and just read about what this was, how you were able to access it, all of the changes and hacking that Derek and his team were able to put together to make this happen. And I don't know, I think it's something that I would love to find time to watch at some point, but I really enjoyed reading the post because the fact that this stuff existed at all and now we're able to experience it is just really neat to me, and something that I would always be interested in something like this. Probably more than in the movie itself. I don't know. Has anybody watched it? Is it cool? Is it worth it? Or is it worth it more as what a really neat experience that, I could have imagined watching on my Dreamcast back in the day? But let me know in the comments what you think. But either way, well done and excellent work from Derek and his team. Chris from Displaced Gamers recently posted a video titled, "Why is Contra Force on the NES so slow?" And the guess is that Konami developed the game for the mapper chip VRC6, which would allow it to have a lot more powerful processing in it, and also planned to release it as Arkhound in Japan in 1991. But since they missed their intended release date, maybe they said, hey, let's just shoehorn this game into an NES cartridge with an MMC mapper and slap Contra on it so that they can sell it to the American audience. And after watching Chris's video, you probably would agree with that assessment as well. And Chris goes into everything from why, and of course, if you've ever seen any of the Behind the Code series, Chris would dig into showing you how this stuff works and giving examples of where it just doesn't work. So, for me personally, I say this every time, but I am not a programmer, but I still really enjoy these videos because I love seeing the behind the scenes of how stuff work. And although I don't think I'll ever be able to program a video game, even an NES game, I still really appreciate seeing how all of this stuff works and why certain things are the way they are. So if you're even remotely interested in this, absolutely give it a watch. And it is kind of funny to think that they just slapped the Contra name knowing that Americans would probably buy it because we did love us some NES Contra. Next up, RetroBit just announced a new fight stick at Gamescom, and Pat from the Shiro crew was able to snap a few pictures and get some more info. And I am really excited for this one because it has the potential to be really awesome. So the thing that really makes it stand out to me is that it aims to be compatible via a selector switch with 2.4 gigahertz wireless adapters, so like the other RetroBit wireless dongles that you would plug in either original consoles or USB, as well as Bluetooth and X-input USB. And that means if they're using the same chipset that they use in their Genesis and Saturn wired controllers, it would be a 1 millisecond of latency device when connected via USB to the Mister. So not one frame, 1 millisecond, which is zero for a human touching a controller plugged into a game console. That is zero latency, which means anybody even using this for competition could confidently use it if they're using the right chipset. The other thing that they were talking about is there's potential for different designs because it's not finalized. So Mark Julio called them out on having an Astro City themed fight stick using a Taito Vulix button layout. And they responded by saying that they might consider different options. And depending on how they make it, it could just have a removable top and maybe you would be able to have different modes for it. I personally think either would be fine for what I do. All of my gaming and most retro is really just 6 buttons and a stick, plus of course, start, select, and some extras there. But I think latency, functionality, and quality of the buttons and stick itself is all that would matter for me personally, because I just want something that is going to feel like an arcade stick, not some cheap buttons that aren't, or not even accurate buttons. I think anybody that's ever used those really cheap buttons, you press it once and you might get 2 button presses out of it or none at all. So as long as you're using quality buttons, a quality stick, and the latency of the wired part is as low as possible, this is an instant buy for me. And I might even sell some of the other sticks I have and use this in place of it so that I could just get used to using the same thing over and over. But, it's still in development. Time will tell if this thing does perform as advertised. I just really hope that RetroBit is listening to the community, and more so than just responding on social media and actually listening to the requests that we all have. Because, they put out some great stuff, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just rebrand some white box stuff, and they don't seem to care that it's complete and total garbage. So hopefully this will have some attention to detail put into it, because this really, truly has the potential to be the perfect fight stick for many people. But, I guess this is all just a preview of what's to come. So we will keep everybody updated once there's more info. And I would love to try one. And I'd also love to bring it down to Brooklyn Arcade and have it used in some tournaments to have some pro players put their hands on it and see what they think as well. But, anybody out there from RetroBit listening, hit up anybody in the scene. They'll tell you we all want the same things, the same core stuff, basically. So talk to your pro gamers, talk to your retro people, and see what you could do, because this has the potential to be the perfect fight stick for us. Next up, the Silent Hill Enhanced Edition project has just received what the developers are calling their final major update to it. Now, the Silent Hill 2 EE project is something that Alex has covered quite a bit on the channel before, and it's essentially a full remaster of the PC version of the original Silent Hill 2, and it adds a ton of features and enhancements, and this update is the final major addition to it. There's already been one bug fix update, and the team will still look into any bugs that anybody might run into, but this should be essentially a complete version of the remake, if you want to call it that. I think it's, I really sometimes have a hard time figuring out what to call these, because a remake, a full restoration, a conversion, I just wouldn't call it like a ROM hack, because it's way deeper than that. So if you want to know more info on this, there's a 70-minute overview of the final update that's available, but also just check out Alex's other posts on RetroRGB if you want to kind of see the process go from where it started to now, including like the 60 frame per second updates and things like that. But this is a pretty big deal for anybody that wants to play that game on modern hardware, but not just for compatibility, but also to take advantage of all of the enhancements. So check out Alex's post for more info. Now it's time for this week's Mr. Updates, care of Lou from Lou's Retro Source. As usual, I'm going to just skim through these, giving my thoughts where I feel like it, but if you want all the details and visual examples, please watch Lou's video. First up, Modal Module released a core that turns the Mister into a MIDI audio creation machine. It's based off the Genesis sound chip, so you basically just connect a MIDI device over USB, DIN, or UDP, or just grab a gamepad, and you could utilize all 10 voice channels to create music. So up until this point, using original Genesis hardware to do that was a bit complicated, but now it just essentially allows you to turn it into a MIDI device, which is excellent because there's been so much amazing music created using original consoles. Obviously, all of Remute albums. I'm a massive fan of Miss Mad Lemon's albums. She uses Amiga for that. So now if you want to create music on a Genesis, this is probably a great way to give that a try. Next up, Anton Gale has been releasing hardware schematics for the Atari-published Kangaroo arcade game, including the I/O hardware and sound hardware schematics. Next, there's new kits and I/O boards being manufactured for the QMTech-based DE10 alternatives. And Antonio Villena, as well as Ultimate Mister and QMTech themselves, have all released different versions. You should really just check each of them and see which one might be the best fit for you. Which has 24-bit video support, which doesn't. Do they work with the version of the QMTech board that has RAM built in, or is it only for one or only for the other? Basically, there's some great choices out there, so just check the features, check which ones are in stock, and see which one would fit your QMTech board best. And I will have more info on the QMTech board in a second. But moving on, there is now what might be the successor to the DE10 Nano. So essentially, the DE1025, which was announced by Terrasic, could be the Mister 2. The detailed specs aren't released yet, so the core Mister team hasn't really decided, is this the one, is it not? But hopefully it will be the board that we all probably hoped it would be. At the very least, can it support faster or cores that require a faster FPGA like Nintendo DS? Can it do at least 4K 60? I think higher than that would be a little bit too much of a pipe dream at the moment, but could it do at least that so you could connect it to modern displays and utilize the native resolution? Also, what about the coprocessor along with it? The one that's in there now is essentially as fast as about a Raspberry Pi 1, but if it's much faster in this, you could use it to do a lot of other stuff, even just basic things like having the MIDI modules implemented right on it, or having more stuff to the 486 and Amiga cores. But if you want more info on that, we did talk a little bit about it on the panel that we did at Retro World Expo. So if you're interested, I really enjoyed that panel. I know I'm biased, obviously, because I got to hang out with all those amazing people on stage, but we did talk about quite a lot of different things, including that. And all of the info that we talked about was what's officially released now. But as soon as there's more details, we'll definitely follow up and see, especially once there's confirmed specs, so we'll know what it could potentially handle or not. Next up, the Mr. Organized project has been released in really with the goal of helping people that has large libraries and games kind of all over the place. So it'll has a collection of DAT files that has allow you to sort your sorry, it's been one of those days. It's a collection of DATs containing A to Z folders to sort your games alphabetically for easy use. Thanks, Lou, for writing that in the post and catching me out of my my little fumble here. So basically, if you have a lot of files on your Mister and you want to organize them, give the Mister Organize project a try and see if that helps. Next, Taki released a lot of conflicting information for the new boards, and in respect of your time, I don't want to go through it all because it's just going to change again. So what you need to know is that they're not available for sale yet. They're supposedly going to be for sale basically any day now, and we will post on RetroRGB as well as on social media the moment they are. And there's supposedly 2 batches going to be put up for sale first, 12 hours apart, to try to cover the whole world to make sure everybody has a fair enough chance of buying them. But it's been weird. More name changes, more stuff. I don't know. I don't want to waste anybody's time doing this. All I will say is, as I've always said, I want this project to be a massive success, but it's just been such a weird journey. But moving on. The Mr. Cade version 2 kits are now available for sale at Mr. Add-ons, and these allow for dual RAM support, 24-bit video output, enhanced controller interface, an improved coin counter circuit, and integrated breakout headers. So I have always praised the original Mr. Cade and called it an excellent solution. And while I haven't personally had a chance to test this one, I think it would be a safe bet to say that it's probably going to be equally as awesome as the original, just with those changes that I just mentioned. So I don't usually like to just blind recommend something, but with such a solid track record, I think it's just safe to say that that's now an excellent contender if you're looking for dual RAM support via a JAMA-based arcade system. The Retro Castle boards have been out for a while, and now there's these, and I think there was one other company making a dual RAM version of it, but I love that there's choices. So as always, check the specs and see what fits your setup best. Next, there's a new version of the Tap2 Randomize, which essentially is a way of having your Mister automatically generate ROM hacks that have different attributes randomized from the original. So you could randomize what boss you'll fight at the end of a level, randomize enemy behavior, change the location of items, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So if that's the type of thing that interests you, definitely check this out and see. I haven't really gotten into randomizers, but I want to. I want to find the time, but I also want to just try and really give it a shot. And it's always a mixture of, you miss the familiarity of the original, but being able to play your favorite game, but in a new way, seems really interesting. So I'll get to that eventually. Next up, Hotego released a core for the arcade game Circus Charlie by Konami. And this one, I believe, is for Patreon supporters. I could be wrong about that. But as always, all of Hotego's cores go public as soon as they're ready. And they're only private when they're still in beta, which I always stood by as, I think, a great way to control your beta testers so that you have a group of people that know what to do and know what to look for. And next, Hotego also gave an update on the Neo Geo Pocket Color Core and said that games boot, but most of them present problems. However, Metal Slug 1 seems to be working fine. So speaking of bug reports, for this one, please don't report any bugs just for the time being, because Hotego is completely aware of that and is in the middle of working on it, which is another great example of why it's great to have a core group of people doing the bug testing for this stuff. But as always, thank you so much to Lou for keeping up with all of this stuff. There is no chance I'd be able to do this on my own. So if you rely on Lou's updates as much as I do, please consider supporting him on Patreon. And thanks again, Lou, for catching us up and even catching us up from the time where we were at the expo. The YouTube channel What's Ken Making recently posted a really great video comparing the QMTech DE10 alternative to the original DE10 Nano. And while I definitely recommend watching the video, and I don't want to spoil it for everybody, the overall assessment is, if you're a dev who uses the DE10 as a development tool, as all of the hardware that you would rely on to do development work built into it, then the original is definitely what you should stick with. However, if you're just somebody that enjoys all of the Mr. cores on it, all of them, nothing missing, then the QMTech is an excellent alternative. And while there were some quirks, some people were saying the HDMI output had some compatibility issues. Lou pointed out the DC barrel jack had some issues. You could always reflow the DC barrel jack, and at that much of a price difference, I think it's worth giving it a try. The concerns that I originally had for it were valid, because these are things that we as nerds should always be asking and always be questioning. But like I've been saying, the more you question it and the more it passes is nothing but a compliment to the original developers who make this stuff. So, and I do think that most of my nerd friends want you to be very critical of all of the hardware they make, because they want you to find out how good it works and they want you to see how much work is put into it. So I think that's exactly what the What's Ken's Making channel did with this. And Ken even looked at the power supply, which didn't look bad. It didn't look like a cheap junk thing that, you might worry about. There were some things like the wire popped off on his, the things that definitely show where they cut costs on it. However, it doesn't seem unsafe. Now, I always say that with the caveat that I am not a power supply expert. I just have enough experience to know that if you're not an expert, you really should be careful with all power supplies, and it didn't seem too bad to me. But if you have any concerns about that, you could always just grab like a Meanwell or a Triad that has the same specs and just use that instead. But I don't know. I would definitely recommend checking out this video if you were curious, because all of the questions you might have were answered in it. At least all of my questions were answered. And even in the details and comments section, Ken had corrected one very small thing. So I just thought it was a great video, and it really increased my confidence that this might be the board that I'll be using in future projects if I need to get another D10 for other stuff. And I personally would get the one with the RAM built in, because that just seemed like a pretty good idea. So, if you're interested, check this out and also look at some of the new kits being developed for it. I also selfishly want one of the Retro Castle kits, because it was my favorite for all the reasons I talked about in that video a couple months ago. But we'll see. I also checked with Ivory to see if he'd be making any kits for it, and I haven't heard back yet. But if you want to know more about the QMTech version, Ken's video is definitely where to start. Next up, the developer Infidelity recently released another Super Nintendo port of an NES game, this time for the game Super Mario Bros. And there were two versions of this. The first is just a straight port of the game, which has all of the features that you would expect from this, including the reduced sprite flicker, reduced slowdown, the ability to just use it via RGB on an SNES instead of requiring an RGB modded NES. And all of those things I've gushed over anytime any developer did a good port of an NES game on the SNES. And that alone would have made this worth talking about, except the developer also released a version that's essentially an NES Maker version of the game. So you could load it up and you could edit and create levels just like Super Mario Maker for the Switch. And it's absolutely awesome to be able to see something like that running on original console hardware. Now, there is one catch, and that it is, at the moment at least, only available to work via ROM carts on original SNES hardware, and it will not work on the Mister due to the way the Mister addresses memory. And that's actually something else that we talked about at the end of our Retro World Expo panel. And I swear I'm not just coming up with excuses to tell you to watch that panel. I really am just saying we covered a lot of ground in that thing, and that should be something that if you're interested in, the discussion at the end goes through all of that. But this is just another exciting project. I love these conversions for all the reasons. And adding mouse support for a Super Mario Maker style thing is just incredible. And if you want to see this in action, there's actually a video posted on social media that goes through exactly what to expect. Senor Linguicia posted it, and it's a couple minutes long and walks you through everything that you might need to know. The only thing that I'd like to add is preference-based, and that's the color palette. Whenever you port an NES game to SNES, or whenever you output an NES game via RGB, you have to select which color palette you want to use because of the way the original composite generated color worked. And normally, I've been using the Kittrinks 34 palette for basically everything, except there are a few exceptions to this. The original Contra, I like the garish look of like the PlayChoice 10 palette. And original Super Mario Brothers, I am one of the horrible, blasphemous people that kind of prefers the blue sky over purple sky. So if that's the case, all you need to do is open the Maker version of this download and check out all of the patches, which contain 18 total color palettes that you could choose from, and just use any program like Lunar IPS, Flips, or whatever else to patch it. And then you could have all of the different color palette choices available right from there. And just to be clear, even though it's only in the maker version of the zip, the palettes could be applied to either version of the ROM, just the straight NES to SNES port or the maker version as well. So while that's that's total preference based. If you want to know what these things look like, I would fire up any software emulator that allows you to just add different palettes and kind of choose from there to see what your eyes prefer. And while there are technically closer to the original versions, this is preference based. It doesn't add any latency, it doesn't change the game in any meaningful way other than look. So pick whichever palette that you like, but this is definitely one that different people are going to prefer different things. And as always, these conversions and enhancements that the developer Infidelity adds are completely free. But if you do want to support this work, which I do, and I want to see more like it, please support them over on Patreon. I believe they also have a tip jar on Ko-fi as well. But this one was cool. I love the original Mario Brothers. I think I'm going to try out this version as soon as I have a moment to, but the Mario Maker one is definitely an awesome thing for people that want to create their own levels. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks to everybody who watches, listens, plays nicely in the comments, and especially thank you to anybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping all of this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week. This week's Roundup is brought to you by Neo Paradigm Entertainment, connecting Southeast Asian influencers with opportunities in the West.